Startup Difference by Chris and Dave Sinkinson. That's what we're talking about today. We're going to bust some myths. Do you need venture capital or angel investors to be a real startup? No. You must have a large staff quickly? No. Take big risks? No. Founder must be aggressive? Alpha leader? No. The path to success is linear and predictable. And the answer to that question is no as well. So today, that's what we're going to be talking about on Start, Scale, Exit, Repeat, Serial Entrepreneur Secrets Revealed. We do the show every Friday at 2 o'clock Eastern, and you can come on live. This is not a typical podcast. It's actually a live show, and we do this live show every Friday, 2 o'clock Eastern. Today, we're talking about Startup Difference by the award-winning authors Chris and Dave Sinkinson, and they have started a number of companies and are very successful startups. So we really look forward to having you join us on Fridays, 2 o'clock Eastern, on Clubhouse. Now, there's an app called Clubhouse. You can join the app and you can actually come join Startup Club. We have almost 1 million members on Startup Club, and you can listen into a number of these episodes, but you can also join us on stage. We love to have people come on stage, talk to us about your issues or your challenges in the startup world, or share your expertise, because that's what this is all about. It's about a community coming together. And we do a newsletter as well on startup.club, which is a blog. It's now becoming quite a popular source of information, free information, by the way. And it's run by Mimi Ostrander, our editor in chief, and it has some incredible articles on there. We're looking for contributors as well. So if you have an expertise, not only can you come on stage and talk to us on Clubhouse, but you can also join us on Startup Club. That's right. You can join us and you can write articles for us, and you can sign up to that mailing list, because that mailing list that we have there, it is incredible. We publish a full masterclass email once per month. We do it once per month, and it has incredible articles, analysis. It has at the time to sell index, where we actually track the market with empirical data, a new index that Startup Club started, and it has some TikTok videos. It's just completely packed with great information. But let's just get this show on the road. Today we are talking about Startup Different, is written by Chris and Dave Sinkinson. These two guys, they're fellow Torontonians, by the way, which I like. I can see, Chris, you're on stage, new to Clubhouse. They are. How you doing, Chris?
Hey, I'm very good. Thanks for having us.
Oh, awesome, awesome. So we got both of you there on Clubhouse.
No, not quite. As you just mentioned, Toronto has got two seasons, winter and construction, and Dave is currently stuck in traffic trying to get to his phone. So
No issue.
I'll message him, so let him know.
No issue
But
whatsoever. No issue whatsoever. I usually do a little bit of an intro here as well. The show is Start, Scale, Exit, Repeat, Serial Entrepreneur Secrets Revealed. And you can join us live on stage by coming to Clubhouse.
Colin, we're not here.
You're not hearing me, Michelle?
Yes, we
Yeah,
are.
we're now. Go ahead.
Yeah, Mimi said we are. So it is Start, Scale, Exit, Repeat, Serial Entrepreneur Secrets Revealed. We are a podcast. You're listening to this in podcast. You're listening to this on YouTube. Just, you can come live. It is a live show. It is on Clubhouse. It's called Startup Club, and we have a website called startup.club. You can sign up to the email list. But today's show, we're talking about Startup Different. And there's a lot of myths out there when it comes to startups. There's a lot of beliefs that you have or notions, but we're going to hear from two individuals, or at least Chris. We'll definitely hear from one of the Sinkinsons about both those myths. And they wrote an award-winning book called Startup Different. I'm going to kick it off right away, Chris.
yeah,
How is it that these notions, like this notion of starting a business and it's pizza and everybody's working hard and it just becomes $1 billion unicorn? How is that not the way it's done?
I wish we were the billion-dollar unicorn, but we weren't quite that. We did do things a little bit differently. I think the first one, obviously, starting a business with your brother is probably something that I think a lot of seasoned entrepreneurs would say, hey, don't do that. That's a bad idea. You'll fight all the time, that kind of stuff. And actually, Dave and I, we were very fortunate because I was the nerd. I was the coder, the guy writing all the code and doing all the tech things, and happened to have this brother who, for some reason, was incredibly good at like enterprise software sales and marketing. So we were a really good team and we got very lucky with that. Now, it's not to say that we didn't have the odd fight or the odd disagreement, I guess you could say, but we did figure out ways to work through those disagreements. My favorite is that we always seemed to argue when we didn't have enough data. And the solution a lot of times to our arguments was if we could just go back, find some data, and then have that conversation again, we would usually be able to convince the other person. The other piece that was interesting is that I think the worst decisions that we ever made were times where we both agreed, where we both thought this is a no-brainer, let's just do it this way. And we didn't challenge ourselves to on how we're going to make that decision, and those ended up being the bad decisions. Lots of really interesting things that we learned over our time working together running AppArmor, which was our public safety software company that we started.
And let's just start with this partnership thing because I have been partnered with my brother now for almost 30 years in technology companies. Love SaaS
Awesome.
models, love it. And to be clear, there is no way we would have succeeded had we each not had different complementary personalities. And I often talk about when you're looking at a startup is to look at the personalities, but also look at the skill sets of your partners and don't just connect a business with somebody who's your brother or who is your college mate, because more often than not, you're just friends and you maybe have similar skill sets or personalities and whatnot. But it just happened that my brother had a very different skill set. He was the coder, and I was more the marketing and sales and operations guy. And between the two of us, he started two public companies and had a number of very notable exits. I want to talk a little bit about that partnership. Like, how important is it as an entrepreneur if you want to get into tech, a tech business, especially with AI nowadays and all these AI companies? How important is it to partner with somebody who complements you versus trying to do it all on your own?
Yeah, it's interesting. So Dave was primarily sales and marketing. I was primarily product development, that side of the house. But what we were fortunate in is that Dave could actually code a little bit. Certainly not his day job kind of thing, but he understood code enough that he could contribute there. And I could go into the product demo and do a pretty good demo of our stuff, even though I wasn't as slick as Dave was. That we did have also some overlap in good ways. He couldn't actually build a full-blown product, but he could understand what we were doing from a very technical level as well. And I could go in there and I could demo. My problem was always that I was just so excited when people wanted to use the software we'd built that I usually lowballed the pricing. So I would not just always leave the pricing to him. But that worked out really well for us that we could almost cover for each other when there were times that he was stuck in traffic or things like that.
Yeah, no, I understand. And I did the little coding myself in college, but quite
Nice.
frankly, it was me going through the paper bins that people had thrown out the work to try to figure out. I couldn't figure out how to do it. It was my worst course in college. Let's start breaking down the myths. You got some myths in your book here. Yeah, and I love your approach. I love the way the book reads. It tells about stories, and we love stories here too, by the way. So when you
Yeah.
talk about stuff today, it's great to talk about stories. If you're in the audience and you want to come on stage, feel free to share stories with us and ask questions. We got Chris Sinkinson on stage here who wrote the book Startup Different. So think different. And let's talk about those myths, so busting these myths that you have that you have in place there. Let's just start with the first one there that you like in order to be successful, you need this venture capital. Let's talk
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah, so we did not raise any money. We were the only people on the cap table of our company was myself and Dave. It was 50-50. It was really straightforward. That's a myth. Everybody thinks that, oh, you're going to start a software company. You've got to go out and get a whole bunch of investors and then hire an army of developers and get big fast. And the reality is that our market, we were selling to higher ed, so universities, colleges, and we were selling mobile apps, and we started back in like 2011. And when you think about it, the app store I think came out in like late 2009, so we were fairly early in that market. And universities and colleges are notoriously slow decision makers. It actually took us 4 or 5 years before the business was really picking up steam and really becoming profitable, and we were able to live off it. It wasn't like a side hustle anymore. I think that if we would have gone down the venture capital route, we wouldn't have been successful because we would have had the dopamine high of all the cash in our bank. We would have hired a whole bunch of developers and salespeople and all the rest of it, but the market wasn't ready for the product yet. It took some time for those early adopters to show success, and then that early majority to then show success. And then by about 5 years in, that's when, the mainstream customers were comfortable with this idea of using a mobile app for public safety at a university or college campus. I think a big one is the money can be a blessing and a curse. It changes the way you think about your business and the way that you grow your business. And for us, if we'd actually seen lots of competitors that fizzled out when the money dried up. They just weren't able to sustain it, whereas we really just focused on profit and growing at an organic rate that the market was ready for. And it worked out tremendously well for us.
Let me give you a couple of stats, or at least I might quiz you here on this one. What
Sure.
percentage of companies do that? Actually, what percentage of companies that are on the Inc. 5000 have received funding? What percentage
Whoa,
of companies?
that is a tough on
Venture
the
capital
ink.
funding. We'll go with venture capital.
Wow. You've got me on this one. I do
And
not
then we're
have
talking
this
about the
data.
5,000 most high growth companies in America. You want to take a guess, or I'll just throw it out there.
Yeah, I'm just going to say 50-50
Yeah,
because
no,
I do
it's
think
it's it's less than 10%. 90% of companies on the Inc. 5000 do not have venture capital. Let me give you another one here. What
wow.
percentage of companies that receive venture capital fail?
I think it's pretty high. I think it's 75%.
Oh my
Also,
gosh, you got it right on
yeah,
75%. No one's ever gotten
yeah,
that one.
yeah.
But think
I
about
think some.
that. The people that think they hit it, they think they've won. And 75% are going bankrupt or going under. To me, that's crazy. That's actually
Yeah,
it doesn't the math doesn't work there. And we coined a phrase in the book, Start, Scale, Exit, Repeat. As that book, we coined a phrase
yep.
called Silicon Valley disease, and we saw it play out with WeWork. So your first myth there, yeah, it really is delivers. You're so right on that one. And
I,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, I remember Dave and I, we actually attended the Collision conference in Toronto a couple of years ago in the summer. I think it was like 1,400 startups were there. And we were just like doing the math on it. Okay, if they each got $1 million in funding and 75% of these businesses won't be here anymore in a few years, that's a lot of money. I think we did the math and it ended up like $1.2 billion worth of evaporated funding that was pumped into companies that were going to fail. So yeah, it's a shock, but I think a lot of entrepreneurs, especially in tech, think they need to raise that money. And I think with AI, it's easier now than ever to start your own tech company.
Yeah, I think we could all agree on that one.
Yeah,
But let's jump to your next myth. And if I'm
sure.
off on the myths here right now, then please help me. But that you must have a large staff quickly. Like a lot of people get the money and they hire a lot of people quickly, and you're
Yeah.
calling that a myth.
Yeah. We organically added staff. We were also, because we were self-funding, we actually hired people that were right out of school. And we liked that because we could mold them to our way of thinking. We used like Scrum and a very agile type of approach. And we actually implemented things like Scrum, not just in like our development team, but in our support team and our sales team. Some of those principles work really well just across anything that you're doing in a business. So we really wanted to have that culture of keeping things moving forward, not like we're just going through the motions, but what did you do yesterday? What are you doing today? And what are you stuck on? The morning scrum questions were incredibly effective at just keeping momentum going on our team. But we didn't have the money where we could go out and hire a couple of dozen staff all at once. We were bringing them in one at a time, and we use the term a lot of a player coach, where Dave and I and the other senior staff would act like player coaches in that we were all producing. Like I was writing code every day and I was training and I was showing other developers how to do the same and sharing best practices and that sort of stuff. So it was a very, very team atmosphere in our company. And that served us very well. But we never had like a whole bunch of new hires show up on the same day and try and onboard them at the same time. It was always done one at a time.
I think it's a more of a disciplined approach almost than you think of what goes on in a typical startup, especially if you watch these shows or We Pumped or We Crashed or whatever the one shows, and you see it seems to happen so
Yeah.
fast and so quick. And there are definitely circumstances or situations where you adapt your style of start, I guess, based on the company itself and how fast it's growing. Let's jump to the next one that you always have to take big risks and pivots.
Yeah.
That you have to be disruptive. Your
Yeah.
software was pretty disruptive, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was definitely, I think the way that we did it that was unique or disruptive was that we were building, they're essentially like white label apps. So if you can think of a university or a college, their most valuable asset is their brand. And they didn't want to use, our company was called App Armor, and they didn't want to go and tell their students to download the App Armor app. So there was no App Armor app. It was, our first client was Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario. And at Queen's University, they spell everything with a Q. So their app was named Secure, but instead of a C in the middle of that word, it was a Q. And that was pretty disruptive. So as we grew that business, our competitors looked at us, and we had 350 clients when Dave and I exited, and there was an app in 2 app stores, and for a while there was a third app store with the Blackberries, because we were actually even developing Blackberry versions of those apps, so while that was still a thing. So you can do the math on it, 700 to 1,000 individual apps that you have to support and update and keep up to date. So our competitors would look at that and they would just say, oh, that's just not scalable. It's just, you can't do that. And actually, where a lot of our software was built was in our back-end tooling to manage all those different apps in the app stores and manage updates and submissions and all that sort of stuff. That was really where we created some distance between ourselves and the competitors, because they just couldn't figure out how we were doing it. They thought we had a big warehouse of developers that were testing out, building APK files and uploading them and doing all that sort of stuff, when in reality, it was just a lot of our time was actually spent on the tooling and automation to manage the submission and ongoing support of those apps for each one of those clients.
All right, and you have your partner in crime, David, here as well. Hi,
Yeah.
David.
Hello. Yeah, can you hear Can you hear me? Am I alive? Oh my
You are
God. So
alive.
sorry.
You're the last humans
Ah,
to have gone on to Clubhouse and joined Clubhouse. I'm joking,
yeah.
but it is going through its iterations, Clubhouse, but we appreciate you coming on. It's an unusual format, but we love having a live
Yeah,
audience.
it's
We've
kind of
got
cool.
people on stage here who want to ask questions or share experiences. If you're in the audience, please raise your hand. We'll jump to you in about 10 or 15 minutes. Just want to get through these 5 myths right now. So maybe David, I'm putting you on the spot here.
Oh boy.
The founder must be an aggressive alpha leader. What do you
Okay,
think?
that's
Yeah.
your
Like, how many
favorite.
bold, aggressive personalities? Because see, I've seen the shows, I've seen the TV shows, I've
Well,
seen the movies. The passive individual cannot be successful. Am I correct?
yeah, it's always be closing, right? Coffee is for closers and so on and so forth. No, I think a lot of that is the business myth here is that, yeah, you have to be this like super aggressive alpha type, and the data just doesn't support that. And Chris and I, or at least I, love to talk about this myth a lot because I think for us, this was a big turning point in sort of our staff culture and our company when we started to, instead of treating people like resources, kind of like business school teaches you, instead we started to, invest in people as people. And when you look at the data behind this, first off is that the word alpha is like totally bastardized. It's actually comes from a book about monkeys called Your Inner Ape by Franz Dual, a famous primatologist. And it was actually, for those folks in the U.S., it was Newt Gingrich who actually changed this term for Republican Congresspeople. But anyway, and basically the idea though is that in nature, in most cases, the alpha of a troop is actually usually the most empathetic monkey, which is not something you'd expect, but it's actually the one who builds the most bridges and who works together with another monkey in many cases, or another ape, I suppose, in order to be successful. And which kind of makes sense to us, right? Like, who would we prefer to work with? As a boss who's pushing us around, who's like super aggressive, or somebody who actually takes the time to invest in us and invest in our careers? And the second part of the myth is these alphas get more done, right? And it's complicated, but the long story is not really. And the reason for that is that while they might be an ends justify the means and they might get results on a personal level, the net effect that they have on the organization tends to be overwhelmingly negative. They tend to be toxic employees. They tend to create little kingdoms in the company. They tend to push staff out who would otherwise be good performers themselves. So it's a complicated picture, but the long and short of it is that leading with empathy works better. You get better results. Your employees are more motivated in their work. They deliver better outcomes for themselves and for customers. They're more likely to stay at your company. The list goes on and on. But it's so funny how many founders you run into who just they get a little bit of success and they lose their minds. This is one thing that I guess we just wanted to flag for people, both from a data perspective and us personally. Things are a lot better when you invest in your employees and are an empathetic leader as opposed to this business alpha type.
Yeah, but we all know Steve Jobs. He was super alpha, super
Yeah, like
successful. So why are you saying that he was wrong?
yeah, first off, I want to make sure everyone knows Steve Jobs isn't the real deal. No. I think, look, there are types of people who can motivate people who can be like that. But on average, in most cases, we are not Steve Jobs. And that can be painful sometimes for people to hear. He's an incredible mind, incredibly impressive person. But more often than not, where we're going to do better is by, on the whole, is by actually delivering good leadership with empathy, caring about people, and trying to invest in them and in their success. And then in return, they invest in your business.
No, I think this is great. No, I'm having fun with you a little bit here. I talk a lot
Yeah.
about this concept in my book as well, but I'm leaning here on Jim Collins' level 5 leadership. And I used to joke
Hmm.
around that Steve Jobs is the ultimate level 4 leader. And then people say,
Hmm.
"What? He was
Yeah.
not no, he was not level 5. He did not have the ability to be empathetic and to wrap when you're a startup founder, I think you got to take it to more extreme. I know we see
Yeah.
this perception in the media, but you've got to take it to the extreme, so much so that you don't you wrap your company around your employees, not your
Yeah.
employees around your company. Like it is all about your employees because you cannot compete with Fortune 5,000.
Exactly.
You cannot.
Exactly.
And you act like
Yeah.
an idiot, an arrogant person, whatever it is, you're going to lose people very quickly. So what do we got? We got no choice but to take that alpha drive, to take that dominant personality instinct and temper it and actually become very kind and caring and actually build our company for our employees versus trying to build wealth for ourselves. And I know that's like the backwards way of thinking, but I feel like both of you in your book, I keep thinking I'm going to say think differently, but it really is startup different.
Yeah.
In startup different, you really do try to take that and say, no, wait a minute, that's not actually how it works. This is not actually how 99% of entrepreneurs succeed. They really
Exactly.
truly are nice people, and they've got to really be overly nice to their people and understand their people, understand their motivations. Understand something like 60% of people leave their jobs because they don't have any upward mobility. They're not learning, they're not developing. And it's all about them. It's all about them. It's not about you, the entrepreneur. And that's I love the way you come at this. If you want another comment on that one, and before we jump to the last myth.
Yeah. I just think I think you nailed it there with that, like 99% of the time. That's not what happens. The other thing I want to mention too, though, is that people view this as a burden, and which is hilarious to me because I actually think this is a fundamental competitive advantage that you can have over other companies. If your people believe in what you do more, that's part of your product, just like everything. The way you do something is such an important part of every single company. And I fundamentally believe that for us in our market, it was something that gave us like a legit competitive advantage. Our people cared a lot. And it's easy to overlook this and be like, oh, this is just something I have to do or like a cost center. I think this makes you much more competitive when you have a better leadership team who believes in their people. And the last thing here, I'm sorry, I'm the big talker. I don't know if this has been made clear yet or not, but
No,
the,
Chris is
the
too.
last thing,
Chris is too.
okay, good. He's a long talker, thank God. And the other thing is that I think empathy is one of those things that actually trickles down. So if you do this as a leader, then you'll find that other people in your leadership team will start to do it. And then they trickles all the way down to your customer. And again, that goes back to that competitiveness piece. I really think this is a fundamental competitive advantage for the companies that do it well.
No, I love it. All right. I know we've got a couple people on stage, but just bear with us, Jason and Michael. We're going to get to you in a minute here. This idea that the path to success is linear and predictable. There's always this way to do things. There's a sequence, a playbook, and if we just follow it, we'll all become rich. But you're going to a different direction saying, wait a minute here. Because that's what, by the way, that's what the show's all about. That's what my book was all about, was how to crack the code of what it takes to become a successful entrepreneur. So I'm saying it's
Mhm.
crackable. You're saying, wait a minute here, it's not the same for everyone. Either Chris or David on that one.
I'll say that I think what the crux of it really is that there's like an assumption as to a set of ways that it takes to grow your company and be successful in the startup world. And I think my fundamental argument is that most people get this wrong and that you should actually beware the conventional wisdom. There's a lot of, hey, you should do this, you should do that out there. Honestly, I think it's more complicated than that. And if you actually dig into the data behind a lot of these base level assumptions, this conventional wisdom, you'll find that actually most of the time it can harm your company instead of helping it. So for me, that's like my general feeling on this. And the other thing too that's worth mentioning is that, and I think for any of the entrepreneurs obviously listening today, is that you're going to feel a ton of pressure, particularly when things aren't going exactly as intended, to change course. And when that happens, there's this weird tendency to look around and be like, okay, what are other people doing? What is the expectation? And that's really the crux of where these myths come from, because people make these decisions in moments of duress. They start pursuing something that might not actually help them, or they start hiring people, or they this, that, or the next thing, and it actually makes the situation worse. And so this is one of those things where it's almost like a gut check moment. Like you have to be very cautious with anything that's accepted as the right thing to do, and properly evaluate it for yourself and your business. And I think Chris is around, but he might be having
Yeah, I was
technical
going to ask
issues.
before we just jump over to Michael or Jason, can you each share a story? Maybe it's from the book, maybe it's not from the book, about startup different, like something that you experienced when you were launching the business and you thought it was this, but it turned out to be that. And I know we've covered 5 myths, but we'd love to hear the stories. Maybe one story from each of you, and then we'll jump to Q and
Sure.
A.
Yeah. Chris, I'll go first, man, and then you can get her done after. So I guess the myth I always like to talk about is, and we touched on it a little bit, is this culture myth. At least what we did terribly wrong. We refer to it as our culture failure. And basically what this was is, so back in the early days of the company, it was me, Chris, and a few other employees, and we were trying to figure out, for the founders, you'll work in a cave. You don't need much motivation. You're already motivated. You want to be successful. You want to get there. But for the employees, like, they need something to believe in, and they need a cool place to work and all these other things. And Chris and I just totally half-assed this. What we did instead is we looked around and we were like, and back then, this is when Netflix was becoming a big deal. And you remember they released a PowerPoint deck that was just called Culture. And it was all these things they were like revolutionary at the time, but basically table stakes now. You can come to work whenever you want, you can wear whatever you want, yada yada. And so Chris and I were like, hey, let's just implement this. We want to be a unicorn, right? We want to be worth billions of dollars. Clearly, this is all we need to do. That's a great example of culture. So let's just do that. And so we try to implement this like culture based on this PowerPoint deck, and it just goes like terribly wrong, because it's not how Chris and I like to work. It's not what we like to do when we're working. It's not how we like to work. And broadly speaking, it was a disaster. We lost all of our staff. Everybody left, or we had to let go of one person at the time, because they couldn't really deal with that culture. And of course, it was definitely partially our fault as well. We couldn't really explain it to them that well, or even live it that well. So this big culture failure was kind of like one of those moments where I remember turning to Chris and being like, "Are we done? Is it over?" And of course it wasn't. We still had paying customers, and they wanted their product to work and all that kind of stuff. So we still had obligations. But it was one of those moments where it was like, damn, like what happened here? And once we realized that actually culture and especially like systems for employees have to happen first, and then you can bring people in once they have something to buy into, and a structured job and all these good kinds of things, and a culture that you can live up to as a co-founder. Once you get to that place, that's when you can start adding staff members. So the second go around when we did it, we were much more successful. We had a mission, we had a vision, we had our core principles. We moved to a co-working space that had a lot of people in it, and they did a good job of culture as well. There was, for one thing, a lot more people there. It was because it was all lots of little companies, and also they did like beer on Fridays or Thursdays or something like that. And there was pancakes every once in a while, like those little things. But these things all mattered, and it helped us put together a decent culture for our company. And we learned a lot from that once we ended up moving to our own office space. That, oh, okay, we need to adopt some of these principles, and we need to invest in people. So that's one of my favorite stories to tell, because I find a lot of founders, they think product first, revenue first, profit first, and then like culture later. And I would argue that it actually has to happen before, definitely before employees, and something, it's got to be something you're thinking about early on.
I love that. And it's funny, we run a small incubator here in South Florida, and I am amazed at how much individuals within the incubator meet and talk and help each other out. And oh, you got a cool development. One guy's got a cool development company in South America, and oh, I could use a couple developers. Doesn't matter. Like I think the incubator, that whole this idea of launch a startup in a garage, I think that is an antiquated idea. I think launch a startup in a community like Startup Club, like even just an incubator. They do a free incubate session here at Nova, which I speak at, and it's amazing. They can bring in 10 experts. It's absolutely free. They help you get funding, everything. And but when you're all on your own, it's hard to do that. And there's actually a really good stat on this one, Score, which I know is in the U.S. And we have a lot of Canadians here. I'm a fellow Canadian Torontonian, moved to the States years
Yeah,
ago.
you're a Toronto guy, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So
I'm going up the summer.
nice,
I'm going up for the summer. I'll be there. It'd be cool to go for lunch. I'm up there. I rented a home in Etobicoke.
nice.
My kids live there,
Oh,
and
nice.
we're going there for the summer. We have a cottage up in Halliburton.
Oh,
Yeah.
sweet, awesome. It's 22 degrees here today, so get up
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
It's the main thing.
It's nicer than Florida right now.
Not Fahrenheit. Not
Yeah.
Fahrenheit, right?
These incubators are in every
Sorry.
town in America and Canada, and you can connect, and it makes a huge difference. All right, Chris, we want a story from you. We want the dirt from you, Chris.
Yeah, I was just thinking about what thing gets my feathers ruffled the most when I think about startups and especially in tech and software development stuff like that. One of the things that I think the myth is that you need to have an 18-month to 2-year product roadmap that you're working on. And we went down that road of building out the roadmap. And when I think back about it, it was almost like a curse to have a product roadmap that was that far out, because it was almost like blinders. We were ignoring everything that our customers were saying. We were ignoring what was happening in the market because we were just focused on our roadmap. And we threw that out the window at some point. We just said, you know what? We got a rough idea where we're going long term. Okay. We know we're using mobile tech to help people be safer, public safety. But we didn't really plan out more than about 6 weeks, because we did 3-week sprints. And so we would plan out the current sprint and we'd start to have a rough idea what the next sprint was going to have on it. But we kept ourselves nimble. And I think that was so much better because we'd have opportunities. Dave would have sales opportunities and he'd have a customer say something that they needed some capability. And we always had the ability to slide that into the next sprint and use that to close a deal. So, really thinking about as you're growing your business, your product is taking shape, I think having a long term roadmap may be the myth, the thing that you don't need. And in fact, what you should be doing is really just thinking about 6 weeks out and stay nimble, stay so that you can pivot really quickly when there's an opportunity or a change in the market or a competitor does something or what have you, you can respond to it. Whereas if you're focused on this written in stone 18-month roadmap, it's not going to serve you well.
All right, that's awesome. That's sort of 100% on board with that one because I'm very big on this idea of a BHAG and a 3-year goal and a 1-year goal and all that. But I'm definitely buying into your thought there around you got to be willing to move and change. And in an AI world, things are moving so fast. Today we have Michael Campbell on stage, and Michael is actually the CEO of a company that I've invested in. Just for full disclosure, and I told him that you two were coming on, and I thought, oh, this would be an amazing opportunity for Michael to listen in and also maybe get some advice. So he's an early stage. I wouldn't say early stage. I think it's about a year and a half, to almost 2 years in development, and he just launched his software product about a week ago. Michael, I'm doing you an injustice here, but I'll let you introduce yourself, Michael. And if you have some questions for Chris or David, and if Chris or David, you have any thoughts about his company, maybe you can spend less than 60 seconds, Michael, on your company and what you do and what your challenge right now is in trying to get your software platform to market.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for having me on, Colin. Chris, David, your story is absolutely incredible. I can relate to a lot of things that you guys and challenges that you guys have been through. I have a couple questions for Chris and David, but first I'll introduce my software. It's called Pencilla. It's an AI graphic design software, very similar to Canva. We have over 20,000 templates, and we recently just launched a couple weeks ago. So I have a couple questions for David in this because you're the marketer. When you first launched your SaaS, what are the best acquisition channels you use to acquire your first 1,000 customers?
Hey, great. Interesting question. It depends on, sorry, I'm trying to avoid the neighbor's dog. I was out in my backyard and he started barking at me, so I had to come inside. So I'm just a little rattled here for a second. So basically, it depends on the nature of your company. So for us, classic business answer, by the way, it depends. But we're a B2B company. So obviously, we were going to market in a couple of different ways. And I'll give you our broad strategy and then hopefully that's helpful for you. But effectively, what we would try to do is we would just try to place small bets. So we had obviously social media channels. We would do ads in magazines. We would do ads on certain websites. We would join trade associations. We would go to trade shows. We didn't, this might sound like a weird one, but we did RFPs as well. Basically, we were just trying to get out of the market and see what was the most effective way to actually go to market. And then when we found one that really worked, we leaned in harder. So a good example is we found that going to trade shows became something that we really had to do in our space. And just for reference, we were in public safety, so we were selling to campus chiefs of police and to directors of campus security and emergency managers. Those were our primary titles that we pursued. So we'd go to their conferences and they really needed to see us in real life. They needed to have the high fives and the handshakes and the backslaps for it to be credible. And so once we knew that, yeah, we had like 1 year we went to 3 trade shows, then 5, then 10, then we went to 30, and we got really good at it all over the world. And we figured out which ones worked best, and then we really went deep on those ones. So that's like the piece I would add there. The other thing is we did really well is referral programs. When you have, especially early, a lot of people say, and I think this is accurate, that 0 to 1 million is like a really difficult sort of space to get going. And it's mostly because you just don't have much credibility. So with those early customers, you're obviously going to dazzle them with the product and customer service and be really there for them throughout that process. When that goes well, you're going to ask them for referrals, word of mouth referrals to other organizations. You can try to incentivize those referrals. Hey, we would donate $500 to an organization if they referred us to another person or another organization that successfully purchased from us as well. And that organization that was buying would also get $500 off their contract, which wasn't a huge amount of money, but it was like enough to get them moving. So that's a big deal as well. And then lastly is, again, in a B2B market, you need like the case studies, you need the documentation, you need that kind of stuff. So we would do, in some cases with the very early customers, we would do heavy discounts in exchange for basically doing case studies with them and being able to show best in use functions or like usage of our product. So hopefully that helps. Does that help? Hope that makes sense.
No, it helps. It helps a lot. Actually a B2C because I'm very similar to
Yeah.
Canva. What do you like out of all your experience? What do you think you would recommend? Say you had to launch my product. What would you recommend? What online avenues do you think would
Yeah.
be the best approach?
Yeah, so we have the podcast, right, and the book. So we do have a limited amount of consumer, and it's consumer marketing. And I'll just say it can be very expensive very quickly. I would probably say I would have a couple different avenues. Obviously, significant social media presence. I would be considering if I could find an influencer in this space. It depends who again what your target persona is, but somebody who is credible, has a real following that you could then lean on and in some cases pay to talk about your product or show your product or do a little reel about your product, something like that. I think that would help a lot. I think that builds a lot of credibility. I think that maybe I'm biased, but I do think podcasts in general are playing an increasingly large role in some of the buying patterns among consumers. So I don't know if there's a ton of like design podcasts that you can be on as a guest and or maybe sponsor. I'm not sure what your budget is either, but something along those lines. And I would probably start there, to be totally honest with you. And then after that, I'd have to see what channels we're having some kind of success in and lean in there. But that's kind of my hot take. Chris, did you have anything you want to add to that? you wanted to throw
Yeah,
on there?
so Michael, yeah, great question. So we were building apps, selling them to the universities, but the actual users were the students primarily at the universities. And what we usually did was we had the security director, the person who was in charge of security at the university, usually did a presentation to all the incoming students. And he would put the app up on screen with a QR code. And it was usually the time when the students were showing up with their parents and stuff like that. And the download rates were insane because here's a security director telling you to download this app, and your parents are sitting next to you, poking you on the shoulder, saying, "Hey, get that right now." It was a lot about timing and getting it in front of the students at the time when it was going to be most impactful. So when I think about and you think about the problem that the user is trying to solve, and the timing on when they have that problem and how you can introduce your product at that time. So nothing specific other than to think about timing and think about the way that your customers probably want to be marketed to, where they are when they're going to have that problem. I don't know, not the most specific thing, but hopefully some tips
Yeah.
that might help
No,
you find it.
that's a great tip. That's a very creative way of getting customers. Good on you, whoever thought of that. I also have another quick question for you, Chris. When you guys launched your first product, how did you use customer feedback to modify it to ensure customers actually use it, not just sign up and are happy with it? And also, how did you approach communication with these customers for feedback, and how much did they impact your development process?
Yeah, it's one of the things that always was tricky with us is that we had to work everything through the universities and colleges to get them to collect information from those end users. Like we couldn't just go off on our own and have a pop-up appear in the app asking them to fill out a survey or something like that, which actually made it very difficult for us to scale it. Fortunately, though, each one of those universities typically had a committee which comprised of students that were providing feedback and that sort of stuff. So in a way, it was difficult, but in a way, it was also easy that we were interfacing with the people who were designing the app at the university, and they were able to provide that direct feedback. And they were like power users, right? Because they're on the committee, they're all about safety and security. They knew what features they wanted. So I don't know if that's maybe something that you could look at is definitely you want to collect information from your users, but if you can find the power users, the ones that are really going deep on that software, they're probably the ones going to give you the best information. Dave, do you have any feedback on that as well? I feel like from a sales perspective, you sometimes heard things from prospective customers and things like that.
So a big part of my job would be, to some extent, would be just what I called playing interference, because we would get so much email feedback from the buyers, which were like these guys at these universities and gals at universities and colleges, that wanted us to build something new because they knew we were developing the code. And the and I wouldn't let everything get to Chris, just being totally honest with you. Now, I do think feedback plays an incredibly important role in the development of any product. It's that build, measure, learn cycle. We all know the lean startup and how you have to take this information and iteratively improve your product until you get closer and closer to the market need. The couple of considerations, like we would always think, okay, so we've got this feedback from a customer, and we would solicit, or just send us an email or let us know or whatever, get this feedback. We would then evaluate, okay, is this a good use of our product? Is this something that we should do? Then it was, and so assuming that was yes, it'd be like, okay, is this something that can apply broadly to the market? Yes or no? And then it was, okay, is this something that we could potentially either charge for or would create competitive distance between us and another organization so that we would be more appealing? There has to be like a real reason behind it. As soon as we could check these boxes, then it would be something that we would basically consider doing. But I urge you, like before, sooner rather than later, reach out to anybody that's using your software, figure or your product, and figure out how they're using it. Figure out what are the things they like the most about it, what are the things they don't like about it, or they wish it did, and then try to work through that and really try to identify patterns. If you find that a lot of people are struggling maybe with a piece of UI that you have, or they really wanted to do X or this, that, and the next thing, those are the targets to pursue and consider for your, I don't want to say product roadmap because of Chris's previous answer, but
No product
for your
roadmap.
development pipeline. Yeah, no, we hate product roadmaps. So anyway.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. That really helped a lot. I really appreciate your guys' answers. And
I'm
that's it
glad.
for me. In terms of questions, Colin, I'm not sure if Colin's still here.
He is here and he asked me to step in for a minute for him. So I'm going to back up a little bit. We're talking a lot about getting customer feedback. One thing I have found is you have to be very careful about it, right? Because people just say whatever their little pain point is for the day. One thing that I have found immensely helpful, and I know you were alluding to this, Chris, is let's just say you're going to do a survey. I strongly recommend you start with a very small sample group and do open-ended, because what a lot of people do is they'll look at a survey, they'll put together all their questions and there are multiple choice answers, and then they'll end up introducing a lot of bias based on what they believe. So one thing that I've found immensely helpful is do like your own version. I'm not talking about spending tons of money, focus group. And honestly, could be as simple as calling people that bought the product and getting on like your customer service. In fact, it could be like, oh my gosh, thank you, Michael Campbell. I'm developing this and I really would. People love that kind of thing. Okay. And you start
Yeah.
to, in a very systematic way, without being overcomplicated, get some open ended feedback that you use for your kind of exit survey or other kind of surveys that you're doing. Another thing that I have a lot of friends that have started to do, I'm going to start doing it myself as well, is there are a lot of feedback websites now. Okay. I'm talking about where for not very much money, $100 or something like that, you can post a problem or creative or a logo or whatever it is, or ideas for software, etc. And you can get like panels of quote experts, certain kind of segments just very quickly give you feedback. And then I would say, then you put that into a more quantitative survey so that you feel pretty good that you're not introducing bias. And there's a lot of different types of questions without getting too statistical that you can use so that it's not a bilateral answer. And hopefully you can extract a little bit more meaningful information. And I always would encourage to, at the end, maybe have open ended. It's a pain in the ass to tabulate that, but you can do that. And like you said, see if there's any kind of particular theme. And then last but not least, I would say these things are one point of data. Michael, I know you're a very creative guy and you have a lot of experience yourself, is don't underestimate also what the customer doesn't know and what you know your vision is too, but layer it all together. That's just a
Yeah.
fun part of the job, right? Like figuring out what the hell people want. And then
No,
I
for
think
sure.
going back to the top, who is the customer? Who is the ideal customer? Because that's going to help you. Because then part of your surveys, let's just say the 5 type of customer segments that you have, they self-identify in. And then you put in some questions like to try to figure out where are they online? Where do they get their information and things like that? That will help you. And I know you're part of that demographic, understand like where these people are hanging out and what their issues are.
No, for sure. That really helps Michelle as well. Thank you. I found that I found a couple acquisition channels, so we just started acquiring customers. And I noticed that we're design software and our customers are, some of them are creating multiple projects, but there's some that create one or two projects. So I'm just curious why those customers are just creating one or two and then they drop off. So I think,
Yeah.
David, you told me to do this sooner than later. So I think I'm actually going to start approaching these customers right away because we just launched and getting this feedback. And I think that will help
Yeah.
form the product in the
Right.
right
And
direction.
you know what? A
I
complaining
think. I think.
customer, it's oftentimes your best friend. Like finding
Yeah, I agree.
those kind of people, because they're the ones that aren't afraid to tell you rather than somebody who's just going to tell you what you want to hear. I think that's a great idea, Michael.
Okay, great. Great.
You
Thanks, guys.
I guess just one super last thing. I really like Michelle's point on you approaching them, being like, "Hey, I'm the co-founder." I think that really goes a long way. I think you get a lot more response that way when you try to do stuff like this. The other
Have
thing,
you guys
based on
done that as well?
yeah, ages ago, I'd say, "Hey, I'm Dave. I'm the co-founder," and I would just call people up and say, "Hey," again, we were B2B, so I was calling a person like at their desk and they were working or whatever. But I'd say, "Hey, we have a mobile app with you. Really would love your feedback. We're noticing X, Y, and Z, et cetera, et cetera." Uh, and definitely, as accurately said as well, beware the feedback that's part of the calculus where you want to take your product. So you want to bring that together. And then lastly, yeah, so you mentioned that you're having people make one or two things and then drop off. Like that alone might already start giving you some insight that something in the process of trialing, like the onboarding, might be too burdensome or it's too complicated or you're marketing to the wrong people. There's something that should give you already an early hunch there's something going on there and requires further investigation. I would definitely be trying to call or email or somehow track down those people and be like, hey, I noticed you stopped using it. What gives? And they may not answer you, but I think it's worth the effort.
Perfect. I'll definitely do
All
that.
right. Great, Michael. Thank you for that. And we're running out of time. We only got 6 minutes left, and I know we got two more people on stage here. And Jason has been so kind, and he's an amazing guest, fellow Canadian as well. So, Jason,
Sweet.
welcome back. Jason.
Oh, yeah, quick question. Thank you so much. Everything that you all said validates what I've learned over time, being an entrepreneur a long time. I wanted to ask how much of the idea of blowing up fast, and I think people like think about the examples of Zuckerberg or Bill Gates, like those. I worked at Microsoft, and Bill Gates said he wouldn't do the things that like made him, and he committed to give away all his money. Like he wouldn't actually, he would do the kind of business that I do, two things. So the people that have that, like they don't even want it. Like he doesn't forces and die with billions of dollars and impact the whole world like that in one sense. And I find a lot of young people, it's like I see some young people because I help young people figure out what they want to do and they want to be famous. And I asked one young person why, and he didn't know why. And I was famous for what? And he didn't know. So how much of it lifestyle is my question? Do you prefer of growing slowly, because I feel like the lifestyle is probably better if you're working with people that want to work with you over time rather than you automatically are in debt to all of these venture capitalists and now you control countries based on your actions. Like, do you not prefer the lifestyle you have of not having to control like so many resources, and then if like you affect democracies with your decisions? Is it not a better lifestyle? And I'm from Toronto too.
Hey, nice. Toronto, local boy. So a lot of even in the crux of the way you're phrasing the question is interesting because it gets to that sort of get big fast, which is honestly, I think, also really dangerous for a lot of entrepreneurs. The funny thing about starting a business, as I think a lot of folks here would probably agree, is that some businesses just take time. They just take the market just needs to adjust or it needs to come around on your product. You need to educate the market, whatever. I often think that if we got venture capital for our business, we would have failed. Yeah, we wouldn't have been around because it took us about 4 or 5 years by the time that we started to really have some market credibility and have enough customers. And all of a sudden, it was just like we had so much inbound, we were starting to ride the hockey stick curve up. But so I think that the first thing I want to say is that this lifestyle or otherwise is that the whole get big fast thing can be really dangerous. The other thing too, and I'm not Mr. Anti venture capital, there are businesses that need capital and stuff, but they follow a generalized roadmap of based on things that have worked for other companies in their portfolio that may not actually work for yours, right? That they're fundamentally have different alignment goals. They want to get a good, they want to be able to turn you over usually in about 4 to 5 years and make a good amount of money on that and so on and so forth. Whereas you might want to be building out an empire or building out some a lifestyle business and some or somewhere in between that gives you the lifestyle that you so desire. So I think it's a really interesting question. I think fundamentally what you want to do is you want to be delivering value for customers. You want to be doing right by yourself. You want to align with the mission of your company and you want to make profit while you're doing that pretty quickly. And then things tend to happen naturally. I don't think we were ever going to be a $1 billion company or anything like that. But that being said, I wanted to make as much as I could and I wanted to be famous to our customers, be meaningful to our customers. I think that's a much more realistic path and a much more pragmatic path than just fame in general. I have other, and I'll let Chris get in here in just a second because I don't want to use all the time. We only have 1 minute. Oh God! But I'll just say that I have other entrepreneur friends who on LinkedIn they're out there and they're just talking about themselves and things they're going to, and I find it's just a waste of time. You've got to be in the business, got to be working things that drive top line revenue as much as possible. And Chris, do you want to tack on here really quick?
I don't know if I can add too much to that, Dave. That was pretty comprehensive.
Okay, all right. Mission accomplished. So I think
Right.
I think it's just crazy though. I will just add one last point. That pursuit of fame is a funny thing to me. Business is not about fame. Business is
It's
about
so
solving a
funny
problem.
to me. So funny. It is.
Yeah. So anyway, you want to be famous, go be an actor. So
Exactly. I know we have part of our office or incubator, they want to be famous. I'm like, yeah, just show me the money. I don't need to be famous.
I'm an
yeah, well,
actor and I don't even care about being famous.
yeah,
Exactly.
rich or king, right, or queen.
Exactly.
That's usually the calculus.
There you go. This has been an amazing hour. Thank you, Chris and David and Michael, for joining us today. Colin has actually gone over to another app. It's called Entree, ENTRE. We'd love for you to hop over there. He's giving a master class in failing to win. So, how your failures create and set you up for a win. And they're absolutely critical on the entrepreneur journey to success. So, please visit us. Come back and join every Friday at 2 p.m. here on Clubhouse, the Startup Club. And also, we'd love to see you over on Entree. Thank you again, David, Robert, everyone who came to the stage. And I think we should have you back again, Chris and David.
I'd
Thanks so
love
much.
to
Really
come back.
enjoyed it.
All right.
Yeah,
Have a
Thank
it's
you.
wonderful
great.
weekend, everyone. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks again,
Take care.
guys.
Thank you, Michael.
Bye.